one of the big questions that you wrestle with in the book, right, is why it is that cuteness seems to have this timeless quality. Why we can read lists of adorable things from 1,000 years ago and feel that same emotional response. Talk about the domestication syndrome theory as to why there are some elements that seem to be have enduring appeal.
Well, there are two aspects to feeling cuteness, and one of them seems to be biological. It's just hardwired into our brains and encoded in our DNA. And the reason for that is that human children need a lot of care and attention and also socialization. I think it's really interesting. I'm going off your topic a little bit, but I think it's really interesting that peak cuteness in human children, according to lots of studies, happens at about 5 or 6 months. And that's just the age where children are becoming more aware of the world around them and are able to see other people as separate entities and different agents, different than themselves, and can make social connections. And cuteness works not only for one's own children, but also for other people's children. So if you see a baby being walked in a stroller and you smile at the baby and it smiles back, you're sending a message to that child that strangers can be trusted. Maybe that's too extreme, but that the world can be an open place that can be supportive. And I think that's a really important lesson for children to learn when they're very young. Cuteness helps us to teach it to them. So that's the biological aspect behind it. And the other aspect is just the aesthetic aspect. So cuteness rises up in the arts and in mass culture in different times and in different places, like we've discussed before. But you also mentioned the domestication syndrome. Okay, so I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, and this is only a hypothesis, but we know that dogs, cats, horses, cows, like all kinds of domesticated animals, including rabbits, etc., they share a common set of characteristics. The first of which is that they are tameable. They're friendly, but also physical characteristics, like they look more neotenous than their wild counterparts. They look more juvenile in their appearance, even as they get older. So they have like bigger heads and smaller jaws and smaller teeth and shorter arms and legs, things like that. So I'm thinking about the difference between dogs and wolves, for example. There's a theory that humans are also a self-domesticated species. If it's true, it meant that over a really long period of time in our evolutionary past, we probably preferred to mate with individuals that were more friendly and less violent. Now, it's kind of hard to see that because we are still a really violent species, right? But if you compare us to, say, chimpanzees, which are our closest primate relatives, the levels of violence in chimpanzee communities are many times higher than in any human community. So the one reason I like this theory of self-domestication is that it really gives women much more agency in the history of our species, because it says that women were choosing kinder, gentler men as mates, preferring to mate with men who wouldn't beat them up. And over many, many thousands, tens of thousands of years, that changed our whole species to make us more like domesticated dogs or cats. What do you think?
Richard Wrangham also has this alternative theory. So is Richard Wrangham I'm not sure if he coined the domestication syndrome as an idea, but he's one of the key evolution anthropologists in this. And he also has this idea that we self-domesticated because we developed language, and then kind of beta males would use language to gang up on super aggressive alpha males and assassinate them, essentially. So that's I know this is contested, but these are the kind of different theories available for why we seem to have become domesticated as a species.
Yeah, he leaves out women entirely from that story. He thinks it's all about men ganging up on alpha males. But even in chimpanzee communities, the alpha male is rarely acting completely alone. It's rarely like a tyrant. Instead, alpha males usually have coalitions, and that's how they retain their top space. Otherwise, the other males would do just that. They gang up on the alpha and kill them, and then one of them would take his place. So I don't think it's the whole story.
They're not necessarily mutually exclusive as well. The thing that is so interesting about domestication syndrome is that my embryology is very rusty, okay, but my understanding is that it's something to do with the development of the neural crest. And when the neural crest is adjusted in this way to make a creature, including a person, less reactively aggressive, more playful, all these kind of personality traits that we associated with, say, domestic dogs versus wolves.
Mm-hmm.
It also brings some curious physical
Exactly.
characteristics.
Yes.
And there seems to be a bundle. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem that you can really separate them out. So things like having floppy ears, this doesn't apply to humans, obviously, but having floppy ears, you start domesticating, say, Arctic foxes that you write about, and the foxes get one more tame and happy to play with humans, but two, they get floppy ears because that's just part of the syndrome. It's part of the package.
Yeah, exactly. So the neural crest is embryonic structure, so it's in embryos of mammals, and it's where the spine is going to be later. And the neural crest is sends out cells to different parts of the body and telling it how to develop. So what scientists have found is that if there is a delay in the migration of those cells, then you get a whole suite of changes like the ones you were talking about, which are partially behavioral, like the fight or flight reflex is dampened, less adrenal response in animals that had a delayed migration of neural crest cells, and also these physical characteristics like white patches on the face and tail of animals, floppy ears and smaller teeth and smaller jaws, and the other aspects of the domestication syndrome.
Shorter faces.
Sort of
Basically,
thing.
you look more like a baby.
And rounder heads too, yeah. Yeah,
Right.
they're all
Yeah.
neotenous characteristics. And humans are the most neotenous of mammals, so it could be a connection.
Which seems weird because we are also in some ways very violent. But the
Hmm.
distinction that Wrangham makes, which I think is a useful one in general, is between reactive aggression. So the example that he gives is you could never put hundreds of chimpanzees on a 747 and expect to fly safely across the Atlantic because they would just tear each other's heads off. Like they can't cope with that level of sort of impulse control. Whereas humans, we do that quite happily. But we also create nuclear weapons. So we can be proactively aggressive, I think is the expression, meaning that we get together with other humans and we plan extraordinary aggression, but we are low in reactive aggression, which is the kind of the hair trigger, what are you looking at, Larry guy in the pub aggression. Obviously we have a bit of it, but we don't have anywhere near as much as, say, chimpanzees.
Yeah, that's the theory. And the neural crest is the hypothesis that links everything together, links the behavioral changes of lowered aggression with the physical changes of having a neotenous, cuter looking body.